In a land ruled by iron and fear, Aveline, a blacksmith's daughter, forges weapons and a revolution. As whispers of rebellion ignite across villages, she rises from the flames to lead a fight against the tyrannical Baron de Clermont. Torn between duty, love, and sacrifice, Aveline must decide what she's willing to burn for freedom. The Blacksmith Queen is the story of a woman forged in fire, destined to reshape her world.
The morning sun cast a pale light over the small village nestled in the rolling hills of medieval France. Smoke curled upward from the thatched roofs as roosters crowed, and the faint clatter of wooden wheels echoed down the narrow dirt paths. At the edge of the village, where the earth met the dense forest, stood a modest blacksmith's workshop alive with noise and fire. Inside, Aveline worked with the steady rhythm of hammer on anvil, sparks flying like tiny stars bursting into the dusky air. Her arms moved with practiced grace, muscles taut beneath a suit-darkened linen shirt. Dark hair was tied back tightly, stray strands clinging to her damp forehead. The glow of molten steel reflected in her piercing grey eyes, which burned with an intensity far beyond her years. Beside her, her father, a broad-shouldered man with calloused hands and weathered skin, watched silently, pride flickering in his gaze. "Strike here," he instructed softly, nodding towards the glowing metal. "Keep the blade balanced. It must be true." Aveline obeyed, the hammer ringing clear and true as she shaped the weapon. The heat was relentless, but her spirit was fierier still. This craft was more than metal and fire, it was survival, defiance, and hope. Her father had taught her well, but she was no mere apprentice. Her skill was exceptional, and in the quiet moments, she dreamed of a future far beyond the boundaries of their village. Outside, the village stirred uneasily. Whispers of unrest drifted through the air like smoke. The nobles had increased taxes again, demanding more grain, more labor, more obedience. Rumors of uprisings in neighboring regions reached even their remote corner, carried by travelers and traders. The peasants' faces were drawn tight with fear and anger. Many spoke in hushed tones of revolt and justice. Aveline paused, wiping sweat from her brow, and glanced toward the hill where the noble manor stood. Its stone walls gleamed coldly under the rising sun, banners bearing the crest of Baron de Clermont snapping arrogantly in the breeze. The manor was a silent sentinel of oppression, a constant reminder of the power that crushed the common folk beneath its heel. Her father approached, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "The world beyond our forge is harsh, Aveline, but the strength you wield here, it can shape more than steel." She met his eyes, fierce and unyielding. "Then we will shape it, father." That evening, as the village settled into uneasy quiet, Aveline remained by the forge, the only light in the blacksmith's workshop a flickering flame. She worked late into the night, crafting a blade unlike any other, balanced and sharp, a symbol of precision and purpose. Each strike of the hammer echoed her unspoken vow, to fight, to protect, to rise. The sounds of the village faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of her work and the crackling fire. Outside, shadows deepened, but within a fierce light burned, heralding the dawn of rebellion. The blacksmith's daughter was ready to face the flames of a world on the brink of change. As the stars wheeled overhead, Aveline's thoughts turned to the road ahead. The peasants' suffering was no longer distant news, it was a call to arms, a summons she could no longer ignore. The forge was her crucible, and she would be forged anew, a queen born not of blood, but of steel and fire. The night held its breath. The village lay quiet beneath a sky heavy with the promise of storm. Aveline worked amid the glowing coals of the forge, the heat pressing down on her like a living thing. Her hands, calloused and steady, shaped a crude dagger, each strike a sharp note in the night stillness. The rhythmic clang of hammer on steel echoed through the empty streets, a sound both familiar and defiant. Around her, the scent of burning coal and molten metal mingled with the damp earth, a heady perfume of struggle and survival. Outside, the village bore the marks of hardship. Thatched roofs sagged under the weight of neglect, and faces worn by toil and hunger peered from shuttered windows. Rumors had begun to stir, whispers of distant uprisings, of peasants rising against the yoke of noble tyranny. Aveline had heard the stories from travelers and merchants, their voices low and urgent. Tonight, beneath the veil of darkness, she would act. She moved quietly through the village, her footsteps muffled by the soft earth. In the shadowed corner of the tavern, a small group had gathered, their faces etched with worry and hope. The flickering candlelight danced across their features, men and women worn by years of oppression, yet still burning with the desire for change. Aveline's voice was low but steady as she shared news of resistance and the need for weapons forged not for plowshares but for battle. Jax arrived shortly after, his lean frame slipping through the door with practiced ease. His weathered face bore the marks of distant wars, eyes sharp and ever watchful. He spoke of tactics and the necessity of training, his words grounding the restless energy that surged among the villagers. Elise followed, her red hair aflame in the dim room, her green eyes bright with passion. She spoke fiercely of rights and justice, her speeches igniting sparks that caught in the hearts of all who listened. Together, they forged more than weapons. That night they forged a bond, a fragile unity born of shared pain and a fierce yearning for freedom. But with every whispered plan and secret meeting came the shadow of danger. The nobles' soldiers patrolled the roads, their heavy boots a constant reminder of the cost of defiance. The laughter that echoed from the manor was cruel and hollow, a chilling soundtrack to the villagers' fears. Aveline's thoughts drifted to her family, to the taxes that bled the village dry and the cruel edicts that crushed their spirit. The fire in her chest blazed hotter than the forge's flames, a relentless call to arms. She knew the path ahead was fraught with peril, that betrayal and bloodshed awaited. Yet, beneath the weight of uncertainty, hope flickered fragile, fierce and unyielding. As the night deepened, the villagers dispersed, returning to their homes with quiet resolve. Aveline lingered at the forge, her hands stained with soot and sweat, eyes fixed on the dagger cooling in the embers. It was a small thing, but in its steel lay the promise of rebellion, a promise that the whispers would soon become a roar. She looked toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn threatened to break. The world was changing, and so was she. The Blacksmith Queen was no longer a dream, it was a destiny waiting to be forged in fire and blood. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the village square, where the air hung thick with a mixture of dust, smoke, and the faint metallic tang of the forge. From his vantage upon the battlements of the imposing stone manor, Baron de Clermont surveyed the unrest below with an unyielding gaze. His tall frame, encased in polished armor that gleamed with ruthless precision, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. A deep scar traced a jagged path down his left cheek, a reminder of battles fought and won, and perhaps of the unrelenting nature of his rule. Below, the villagers moved like restless shadows, their murmurs weaving through the narrow streets and clustered homes. They dared not meet the Baron's eyes, but their discontent simmered just beneath the surface, fueled by the weight of impossible taxes and the cruel whims of those who claimed birthright over land and lives. The Baron's voice, when it came, was a chilling echo carried on the cold wind that swept through the fields. Order must be maintained, his captain declared, his voice cold and resolute. Any sign of rebellion will be crushed without mercy. Back at the forge, the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil rang out like a heartbeat. Aveline, her face streaked with soot and sweat, worked with a fierce intensity that belied the quiet around her. Sparks erupted and danced, momentarily illuminating her strong features and the piercing gray of her eyes. Each strike of the hammer was a testament to her resolve, a forging not only of steel but of purpose. She paused briefly, wiping a hand across her brow, and listened. The distant cries of villagers, the shuffle of hurried footsteps, and the occasional bark of a guard's command filtered through the open door. The rebellion was no longer a whisper. It was a gathering storm, Her thoughts were interrupted by the sharp rap at the forge's entrance. A royal messenger, clad in the colors of the Baron's house, stepped inside, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hood. By order of Baron de Clermont, he began, unfurling a parchment that bore the seal of the noble house. All villagers are hereby commanded to surrender all weapons and submit to increased levies. Failure to comply will be met with severe punishment. Aveline's eyes narrowed. She met the messenger's gaze squarely, her voice steady and unwavering. The people have suffered enough. Your threats will not bend our spirits. The messenger's lips twitched, a flicker of disdain crossing his features before he masked it with practiced neutrality. Defiance is a dangerous path, Blacksmith. The Baron's patience wanes. Without another word, he turned and left, the door slamming shut behind him, leaving a charged silence in his wake. Word of the decree spread swiftly. Villagers gathered in hushed groups, their faces etched with fear and determination. Aveline moved among them, her presence a rallying force. She spoke of justice, of a future free from the yoke of oppression, her words igniting sparks of hope that threatened to blaze into a full rebellion. Yet as night fell and the forge's fire dimmed to embers, Aveline felt the weight of the coming storm settle upon her shoulders. The Baron's shadow loomed large, a relentless force of power, tradition, and unyielding control. To challenge it would demand more than courage. It would require sacrifice, strategy, and the unbreakable will to endure. In the quiet moments before dawn, she whispered a vow to the flickering flames, "I will forge a future from the fires of rebellion." The clash between the iron will of the Baron and the fiery spirit of the Blacksmith Queen had begun, and the fate of the village, perhaps the realm, hung in the balance. As the first light of day crept over the horizon, Aveline stood at the threshold of the forge, her gaze fixed beyond the village, toward the dark silhouette of the manor that symbolized all she fought against. The battle was no longer distant. It was at her doorstep, and she was ready to meet it head-on. And so, under the ever-watchful eyes of Baron de Clermont, the seeds of rebellion took root amidst the shadows, promising a story of defiance, steel, and the unyielding quest for justice that would echo through the ages. The forge's fires burned low, but within Aveline's heart, a blaze had been lit, fierce, relentless, and destined to change the course of history. But as the Baron tightened his grip, the question remained, would the Blacksmith Queen's flame be enough to shatter the cold iron of his dominion? The answer would come in the days ahead, in battles fought not only with blades but with hearts and wills unbroken. The morning sun had barely risen over the jagged horizon when Aveline made her way through the narrow dirt paths that wound between the clustered huts of her village. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint metallic tang that always lingered near the forge. Her hands still bore the grime and soot of an early morning at the anvil, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the distant tree line as if searching for something or someone. Jax had returned. The news had spread like wildfire the night before, carried on hushed whispers and cautious glances. Her childhood friend, now a seasoned fighter with scars earned in distant wars, stood waiting by the edge of the village, his lean form silhouetted against the morning light. The years had tempered his once boyish face into something hardened, but his eyes retained their quickness, the same alertness that had saved her more times than she could count. "Aveline," Jax greeted her with a nod, voice low but steady. "The nobles won't wait for us to be ready. We need to teach them to fight, to stand against swords and steel, not just pitchforks and stones." She nodded, a flicker of a smile breaking through the stoicism. "Then we begin at once." Together they moved to a clearing just beyond the village, a space where wild grasses bowed under the weight of morning dew. The peasants gathered hesitantly, clutching crude weapons or anything that could be wielded as one. Some were familiar faces, farmers, shepherds, blacksmiths. Others were newcomers drawn by the growing promise of rebellion. Their eyes held a mixture of hope and fear, uncertainty and fierce determination. Jax wasted no time. Archery first, he declared, producing a bow that had seen better days but was serviceable enough. He demonstrated the stance, the draw of the string, the aim. The twang of the bowstring echoed sharply through the air, followed by the satisfying thud of arrows embedding in the soft wood of a target. One by one, the peasants tried, their shots erratic at first but slowly gaining precision under Jack's careful tutelage. Aveline watched intently from the sidelines, her gaze flickering between the trainees and the weapons she had forged herself just days before. The blades gleamed dully in the sunlight, symbols of both defiance and hope. Her fingers itched to hold one, to feel the balance and weight that spoke of strength and survival. As the sun climbed higher, her resolve hardened. "We will not be crushed beneath the boot of Baron de Clermont," she told the gathered crowd during a brief pause. "Our fists may be untrained, but our hearts are steel. And steel, once forged, is unbreakable." Her words stirred the crowd, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered peasants. But it was not just her voice that would bolster the rebellion. From the shadows of the village, a figure emerged, Alice, the fiery herald whose reputation for stirring speeches had already begun to spread beyond the valley. Alice's arrival was like a flame sparked in dry tinder. Her red hair caught the light of the setting sun, and her green eyes blazed with passion. She mounted a rough-hewn platform in the village square and raised her voice, her words ringing out clear and true. "We fight not just for ourselves," Alice proclaimed, "but for our children, for the women silenced and beaten, for the men shackled by unjust laws. The nobles fear us 'cause we have the strength they lack the strength to dream of freedom." The crowd erupted in cheers, voices rising in a chorus of defiance and hope. Aveline felt a surge of pride and renewed energy. Here, in this humble village, a fire was being kindled that no reign of oppression could extinguish. Night fell, and the village gathered around flickering campfires. Aveline, Jax, and Alice huddled close, their faces half-shrouded in shadow. Maps and plans were spread before them, the flickering flames casting dancing images of strategies and possibilities. "The nobles will come hard," Jax warned, tracing lines on the map. "But if we stand united, if we fight with the strength of those who have nothing left to lose, we can hold them off." Aveline nodded, the weight of leadership settling firmly on her shoulders. "Then we will be ready. We forge not just weapons, but a future." As the fire crackled and the stars wheeled overhead, the seeds of rebellion took deeper root. The Blacksmith Queen's cause was no longer a whisper in the shadows. It was a growing roar that promised to reshape the very foundations of their world. But even as hope blossomed, the shadows of doubt lingered at the edges of her heart. Would the peasants, untrained and untested, withstand the brutal might of the nobles? Could the fragile alliance forged this day hold against the tide of war to come? Only time would tell. For now, the forge burned bright, and with it, the promise of change. Aveline looked to the horizon one last time before the fire's glow faded. Tomorrow the fight truly began. The moon hung low over the village, casting a pale glow that barely penetrated the thick canopy of ancient oaks lining the narrow dirt road. Aveline crouched behind a gnarled root, her breath shallow and steady, her eyes sharp beneath the hood of her worn cloak. The night was still, save for the soft murmur of a nearby stream and the distant hoot of an owl. Somewhere up ahead, the clinking of metal and the low murmur of voices confirmed the presence of the noble caravan she sought. Beside her, Jax shifted quietly, his lean frame tense but controlled. "Are you certain this is the right moment?" he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the rustle of leaves. Aveline's grey eyes flickered with a fire that belied the calm in her tone. "The longer we wait, the stronger they grow. Tonight is the night we strike our blow." They crept forward, the torchlight from the caravan flickering like distant stars against the encroaching darkness. The wagons, heavy with iron weapons gleaming faintly even in the low light, were guarded by a handful of soldiers whose armor softly clanked with each restless movement. The air was thick with the scent of oiled leather and damp earth. Aveline's hands moved with practiced precision, her fingers deftly loosening the iron bindings securing the wagon's axles. Each click of shifting metal sent a jolt through her, yet her resolve hardened. She could almost hear the whispered hopes of her people riding on the edge of the coming dawn. Jack was kept watch, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. "Hurry," he urged silently, sensing the fragile balance of their plan. Suddenly, a twig snapped beneath a soldier's boot, and a harsh voice barked out. The caravan erupted into alarm, torches flaring as guards scrambled to investigate. Aveline and Jax melted back into the darkness, hearts pounding, breaths ragged but spirits unbroken. As the first light of morning broke, word of the sabotage spread like wildfire through the village. Noble weapons lay crippled, their power diminished in a single, decisive act. Villagers whispered in hushed tones, their eyes bright with a mixture of fear and hope. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Men exchanged glances thick with unspoken resolve. Aveline stood at the edge of the crowd, her soot-streaked face illuminated by the pale sun. She felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, the burden of their hopes resting heavily on her shoulders. Yet beneath it all was an unshakable flame, a promise that the time of silence and submission was over. But the victory was short-lived. The thunder of hooves shattered the morning calm as Baron de Clermont rode into the village, his polished armor gleaming ominously beneath the sun. His cold blue eyes scanned the gathered peasants with undisguised contempt. Behind him, knights and mercenaries formed a grim procession, their presence a stark reminder of the brutal power they wielded. The villagers recoiled, fear rippling through the crowd like a sudden gust of wind. Children vanished behind shuttered doors. The elderly lowered their heads in silent prayer. Only Aveline met the Baron's gaze head-on, her defiance a silent challenge. "You will pay for this insolence," the Baron's voice rang out, cold and commanding. "This rebellion ends before it begins." That night, the village gathered once more, the crackling fire casting long shadows on walls, scarred by the day's events. Aveline stood before them, her hammer raised high. "They may have weapons," she declared, "but we have the will to fight. Tonight, we forge not only steel but our future." Her words ignited a fire within the hearts of her people. The rhythmic pounding of hammer on anvil echoed through the village, a clarion call to arms that promised resistance, sacrifice, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. The first spark had been struck, and though the path ahead was shrouded in darkness, Aveline knew the flames of rebellion would burn brighter than ever before. As the embers glowed and the night deepened, a silent vow was made beneath the stars, no matter the cost. The Blacksmith Queen would lead her people through the fire to freedom. The forge glowed in the fading light, embers casting a fiery glow against the rough stone walls. Aveline's hands moved with practiced precision, the rhythmic pounding of the hammer on steel a steady heartbeat in the growing chaos around her. Sparks danced like fleeting hopes, scattered into the cool air, each strike a testament to her unwavering resolve. Yet beneath the strength of her blows, a subtle tremor lingered, one born not from fatigue, but from the weight pressing heavily upon her spirit. Jack stood nearby, arms crossed, his lean frame tense as his sharp eyes flicked from the glowing blade to the restless crowd gathered, just beyond the forge's threshold. Murmurs of discontent and heated debate floated through the air, the rebels' unity fraying at the edges. The strain of leadership was beginning to show in even the most steadfast of hearts. "They question your decisions," Jax said quietly, stepping closer. His voice was low but carried the weight of concern. "Some doubt we can win this fight." Aveline did not pause her work. "Doubt is a poison," she replied, her voice steady, but so is complacency. "They must be reminded why we fight." Jax nodded, but the lines of worry deepened on his weathered face. "And what of your own heart, Aveline? Can you carry this burden alone?" She hesitated, the hammer's rhythm faltering for a heartbeat. The forge's heat was suffocating, yet the chill in her bones was colder still. "I must," she answered, though the certainty felt brittle. As evening fell, Liz's voice rose in a fiery crescendo beneath the twilight sky. From the makeshift stage, her passionate words ignited the restless crowd, her red hair aflame against the darkening horizon. "We are not mere peasants," she proclaimed, "but the hammer that will shatter our chains." Aveline watched from the sidelines, her grey eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight. Pride swelled in her chest at the sight of Liz's unyielding spirit, yet beneath it lay a current of unease. The rebellion's flame burned bright, but the winds of discord whispered through their ranks. Later, beside a flickering campfire, Aveline and Jax sat close, their faces etched by firelight and fatigue. The night was thick with unspoken fears. "The factions grow restless," Jax murmured. "Some challenge your authority, others question our strategy. They do not see the whole path," Aveline replied, her voice tight. "But if I falter, everything falls apart." Jax met her gaze, his eyes searching. "You do not have to carry this alone. We are your strength, but even steel bends under too much strain." Aveline's jaw clenched. "I am not ready to bend. Not yet." The conversation lingered in the cool night air, a fragile balance of trust and tension. When the camp finally settled, Aveline returned to the forge. The silence enveloped her, broken only by the soft hiss of cooling steel. She sat heavily on the worn bench, the weight of unseen crowns pressing down on her shoulders. Shadows danced across soot-streaked walls as she traced a finger over the blade. She had just finished a symbol of their fight, yet also a reminder of the sacrifices demanded. Her heart ached with self-doubt, a quiet voice whispering fears of failure and loss. Yet beneath it all, the fire within refused to dim. She was the blacksmith queen in waiting, forged not only by steel but by the bonds of fire that bound her to her people and her cause. Tomorrow would bring new trials. But tonight, in the solitude of her forge, Aveline steeled herself against the coming storm, determined to hold fast to the fragile hope that flickered in the darkness. And so the bonds of fire were forged not only in metal but in the hearts of those who dared to dream of freedom. The night deepened, and with it, the promise of a dawn that might yet break through the shadows.